December 25th, 1991. A cold night in Moscow. Imagine you're standing in the dark outside the Kremlin, breath fogging in the freezing air, looking up at a red flag that has flown there your entire life. Inside, one tired man sits at a desk holding a pen. When he puts it down, a superpower will no longer exist. No war destroyed it. No army invaded it. No revolution stormed its gates. The empire that terrified the world for 70 years, the empire with tens of thousands of nuclear weapons, was about to be signed out of existence. And almost nobody saw it coming. Not the generals, not the spies, not even the CIA. So how does that happen? How does something that looks unbreakable from the outside simply dissolve? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, back before the flag ever went up. The year is 1900, and Russia is a broken giant. It is the largest country on Earth, stretching across 11 time zones, ruled by one man, Tsar Nicholas II, who believes God himself put him on the throne. But look closer. Most of his people are peasants, living in conditions barely changed since the Middle Ages. Famine comes in waves. Factories are brutal. And then the humiliations begin. In 1905, Russia loses a war to Japan, a defeat so shocking it triggers an uprising at home. The Tsar survives it, barely, but he learns nothing. Then comes the First World War. Millions of Russian soldiers are sent to the front, many without proper rifles, and they die in staggering numbers. If you were a soldier in those trenches in 1916, hungry, freezing, watching your friends fall for a czar you had never seen, what would you still believe in? Back in the capital, the monarchy was quietly destroying its own credibility in a different way entirely. The royal couple had one thing they guarded above all else: their only son, Alexei, heir to the throne, who suffered from hemophilia, a blood disorder that made even minor injuries potentially fatal. In their desperation, Tsar Nicholas and his wife, Empress Alexandra, turned to a self-styled mystic and faith healer named Grigory Rasputin, a wandering peasant preacher who somehow seemed able to ease the boy's suffering when doctors could not. Rasputin's influence over the royal family grew enormous, and in 1915, when Nicholas left the capital to personally command troops at the front, he left Alexandra effectively in charge back home, with Rasputin whispering in her ear on matters of state, including which ministers to appoint and dismiss. Rumors spread, some true, many exaggerated, about Rasputin's scandalous personal conduct and his outsized grip on the government. To the Russian public, it looked like their empire was being run by a corrupt, uneducated peasant mystic, while their Tsar was away and their soldiers were dying by the millions. In December 1916, a group of nobles, horrified at what Rasputin's influence was doing to the monarchy's reputation, murdered him in an attempt to save the royal family from itself. It didn't work. The damage to the Tsar's legitimacy was already done. By February 1917, the answer was nothing. Bread riots in the capital exploded into revolution. The army refused to fire on the crowds, and 300 years of Romanov rule ended in a matter of days. Nicholas abdicated, but here's the twist. That revolution wasn't the communist one. A shaky temporary government took over, made the fatal mistake of staying in the war, and left the door wide open. In October 1917, a small, ruthless, brilliantly organized party walked through it: the Bolsheviks. Their leader was Vladimir Lenin, and he promised the three things every exhausted Russian wanted: peace, land, bread. What followed was not peace. It was one of the most vicious civil wars of the century, reds against whites, with famine and terror on all sides. Millions died, but by 1922, Lenin's side had won, and on December 30th of that year, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was officially born, the world's first communist state, a country built on an idea that private property would be abolished, that workers would rule, that history itself was on their side, but ideas need enforcers. Lenin died in 1924, and after a quiet, patient power struggle, the enforcer emerged, a man the other revolutionaries had underestimated as a dull administrator. His name was Joseph Stalin, and he was about to transform the Soviet Union through sheer force, at a cost the world still struggles to comprehend. Stalin looked at his country and saw a problem. The Soviet Union was decades behind the industrial West. His answer, starting in 1928, was the 5-year plans. Build steel mills, dams, entire cities from nothing at impossible speed. And it worked in raw numbers, but the price was paid in human lives. To feed the cities, Stalin seized the peasants' land and forced them onto collective farms. The peasants resisted. Grain was confiscated anyway, and in 1932 and 1933, famine swept the countryside, hitting Ukraine hardest of all, killing millions of people. Imagine you're a farmer outside Kiev that winter. The state has taken your harvest, your seed grain, even the food hidden in your walls. That famine, and whether it was deliberate, remains one of history's darkest questions. Then Stalin turned on his own. In the Great Purge of the late 1930s, old comrades, generals, poets, and ordinary citizens were arrested in the night, forced to confess to invented crimes, and shot or sent to labor camps. Fear became the operating system of the state. And then, in June 1941, everything changed again. Nazi Germany invaded with the largest attack force in history. What followed were the bloodiest battlefields humanity has ever seen. Stalingrad, Kursk, Leningrad, starving under siege for nearly 900 days. The Soviet Union lost roughly 27 million people in that war. Let that number sit for a moment, 27 million. But in May 1945, it was the Soviet flag that rose over the ruins of Berlin. The USSR had bled more than any nation on Earth, and it emerged from the fire as something new, a superpower. Now comes the part of the story most people forget. There was a moment when the Soviet Union looked like it was winning the future. In 1949, it shocked the West by testing its own atomic bomb years earlier than expected. An Iron Curtain, in Winston Churchill's famous phrase, had fallen across Europe, with Soviet-controlled states on one side and the West on the other, and then came space. On October 4th, 1957, a polished metal sphere called Sputnik became the first human object to orbit the Earth, beeping over the heads of stunned Americans. 4 years later, on April 12, 1961, a farm boy turned pilot named Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space. Think about what that felt like. The country of famines and gulags had beaten the richest nation on Earth to the stars. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev told the West, "History is on our side." Millions around the world believed him. So what went wrong? Here's the thing. The cracks were already forming, and they were coming from inside. The Soviet economy was a command economy, meaning planners in Moscow decided what every factory produced, down to the last screw. That system could concentrate resources and build rockets. What it could not do was make daily life work. There were no market signals, so factories churned out goods nobody wanted while people queued for hours for shoes, for meat, for toilet paper. If you were a worker in a provincial city in the 1970s, you had a guaranteed job, a cheap apartment, and almost nothing worth buying. Under Leonid Brezhnev, who took power in 1964, the country entered what historians now call the era of stagnation. On the surface, the USSR had never looked mightier. Its arsenal was vast. Its map was enormous. But the growth was slowing, innovation was dying, and the state was quietly surviving on one thing: oil money. Then the missteps piled up. In 1979, Soviet troops rolled into Afghanistan, expecting a quick operation. It became a decade-long wound that drained money, morale, and young lives. And at the very top, the leadership was literally dying. Brezhnev died in 1982. His successor, Andropov, died in 1984. His successor, Chernenko, died in 1985. 3 state funerals in 3 years. The joke in Moscow was that leaders were being elected straight from the hospital ward. The system needed new blood. In March 1985, it got some. And this is the great irony of the whole story. The man who came to save the Soviet Union is the man under whose signature it died. His name was Mikhail Gorbachev, and at 54, he was decades younger than the men around him. He could see the truth. The economy was seizing up, the Afghan war was unwinnable, and the arms race with America was unaffordable. His cure came in 2 words: perestroika, meaning restructuring, an attempt to loosen the economy, and glasnost, meaning openness, permission to finally tell the truth. But here's what Gorbachev didn't understand. The system was held together by silence. The moment people were allowed to speak honestly about the famines, the purges, the shortages, the lies, the legitimacy of 70 years began to dissolve. And then, on April the 26th, 1986, reactor number 4 exploded at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. The state's first instinct was to cover it up, even as radiation drifted across Europe. When the truth leaked out anyway, Chernobyl became the perfect symbol, a system that would rather poison its own people than admit a mistake. Gorbachev himself later said the disaster was perhaps the real cause of the Soviet collapse. The half-reformed economy sputtered, shelves grew emptier than before, and in the republics, from the Baltics to the Caucasus, people began asking a forbidden question out loud: why are we part of this union at all? Then everything happened at once. In 1989, Gorbachev made a fateful choice. Unlike his predecessors, he would not send tanks to crush Eastern Europe's protests. So Eastern Europe walked away, Poland voted its communists out, Hungary opened its border, and on November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall, the most famous symbol of the divided world, was torn apart by ordinary people with hammers, while Soviet soldiers stood by and did nothing. Inside the USSR, the Baltic republics, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia declared their independence. Others lined up behind them. In August 1991, communist hardliners made one last desperate move. They locked Gorbachev in his holiday home and sent tanks into Moscow to seize power and turn back the clock. And this was the moment of truth. The people of Moscow poured into the streets and surrounded the parliament. A rival politician named Boris Yeltsin climbed onto one of the tanks and defied the coup to the world's cameras. The soldiers refused to fire. Within 3 days, the coup collapsed, and with it went the last authority the old system had. The plotters had tried to save the Union. Instead, they killed it. One by one, the republics declared independence. In December 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in a forest lodge and signed an agreement stating simply that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. Which brings us back to that cold night, December 25th, 1991. Gorbachev, president of a country that had already voted itself away, addresses the nation one final time, signs his resignation, and puts down the pen. At 7:32 that evening, the red flag over the Kremlin comes down. It is never raised again. 15 new countries appeared on the map overnight, from Estonia to Kazakhstan. Ukraine woke up holding the world's 3rd largest nuclear arsenal, which it later gave up in exchange for security assurances, a decision that haunts today's headlines. Frozen conflicts from that breakup still burn across the former Soviet space, and the war in Ukraine is, in a very real sense, a battle over the empire's unfinished ending. Even the rockets that carry astronauts to the space station today are descendants of Soviet designs. So look again at that man putting down his pen. The lesson of the Soviet Union is not just about communism, it is about what happens when a state builds its power on silence and what happens the moment the silence breaks. Empires rarely fall to the enemy at the gates. They fall when the people inside stop believing. On December 25th, 1991, a superpower didn't lose a war. It simply ran out of believers. And all it took in the end was one man, one desk, and one pen.